Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Game Club. I'm Graham.
And I'm George.
All right, we've got an extra conversation here. I put out a video a little bit ago about my nuclear hot takes when it comes to healing and tanking. There's been a lot of discussion about that online and in our comments section, and even in our Discord, we've talked a lot about it as well. George and I, we've talked about it a little bit. And so I found someone else who had a pretty good take on things online. I reached out to them and they acquiesced and said they would come and join us for a conversation. I've been meaning to do another one of these, especially with George, because I think George is going to have an interesting perspective on this. And so without further ado, let's welcome Illumination.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on the show. I'm Illumination, or Lumi for short. I am a Final Fantasy XIV White Mage advocate and enthusiast. I've been playing Savage for a very long time, probably since the end of Stormblood. So I got a few points that, and I'm heavily opinionated on the matter. So yeah, I'm just here to
Very
offer
good.
my experiences.
Perfect. You're heavily opinionated. You'll fit right in. That's
True.
awesome. Well,
Very
George,
good.
what is your experience with Final Fantasy?
Mine is probably the opposite of yours, Lumi. I have just barely started. I am still a sprout. I did the base game and the first expansion just recently. Graham, for as long as I've known him, has tried to get me to play Final Fantasy, with zero success until just recently.
Yes.
Just the whole MMO thing was really off-putting to me. Without getting too much into the weeds here, Graham refers to me as a normie a lot of the times. The whole like cat girl, dragon boy, all that stuff was also kind of off-putting to me.
Oh my gosh.
To appease Graham, because usually his recommendations are pretty good. I told him, all right, dude, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll try out the game. I'll see how this plays out. And I did not enjoy it. I played Archer, I think, for like the first 30 levels. It was something like that. Just the game would not click with me whatsoever. All the skills that were coming up, I felt like an idiot. I was like, what's rotations? What do I do with my fingers? How do I target things? And I was just like, you know what, bro? I'm not going to touch this game ever again. I'm sorry to say that to you, but it's just not going to happen. Finally, it's like a few years later, actually, a couple of years later at least, we were able to try it out again. And this time we kind of went through the Black Mage route a little bit better.
That helped.
And yeah, it helped a little bit to kind of wrap my mind around the whole concept. And then, like a ray of shining light from the heavens,
Yes.
Graham had the idea to try out all the classes. Meep, a member of our Discord, was kind enough to let me try all of the classes on his account. And I tried out the Dancer. And being able to move while casting my skills was that bridge in my brain that I needed to finally connect the gameplay with the movement, with the rotations and everything. And things just fell into place. And now I can honestly say I'm enjoying the game. I'm still way far behind from everyone else. Yeah, shock, right?
Yeah.
It's something I would have not ever imagined myself saying.
Right.
But yeah, so now I'm here. I'm really curious to see how the conversation will go with you two. If I ask, I'll apologize ahead of time if I ask dumb questions. I will use my status as a sprout as a shield from any criticism on that, because they probably will be dumb questions.
Sure.
But yeah, I've known you for a long time, Graham, and again, since I've known you, you've talked to me about the state of healing in Final Fantasy. And a lot of the times it was mostly like, okay, I think I know what you're saying. Not having played the game, it was, kind of hard to really understand everything. But now that I have a little bit better of a grasp, I think this conversation will go better. And yeah, so those are my credentials, my low credentials there in the Final Fantasy realm.
Hey,
but
you finally got something, and you're really enjoying the story too.
Had something on the board. That's right.
That's right.
Otherwise, outside of Final Fantasy, I'm a well-versed gamer, play a lot of games, so I've been playing
Sure.
for a while. It's just really the MMO, the whole tab targeting thing, the asymmetric kind of view while being planted when casting your skills it was
Sure.
just a lot
Tough.
to get
It
used
was
to for
tough for
me, at
George
least.
to acclimate to. Poor George.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, wonderful. So, blah, blah, as for myself, I have been playing Final Fantasy since 1.0. I played Final Fantasy 11 and absolutely loved that. I started as a black mage, eventually became a white mage out of necessity, but then just found out I really liked healing. It was just a fun thing. I've been healing primarily, not entirely, but I've been healing primarily ever since. And when Final Fantasy 14 1.0 came out, I was there day one. I was freaking ready and excited, and it was terrible. It was so bad.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and yeah, so they shut that down and released 2.0. I was there day one as well, played it all the way. I've taken breaks here and there, but I've been playing it ever since. And I really loved healing at the beginning of 2.0. I thought it was maybe some of the
Mhm.
best healing I've ever done. It was so fun. But I feel like the game has moved further and further away from what healing should be about, in my opinion. And so that's the primary topic that we're going to talk about today is how Final Fantasy is, there's a lot of talk about classes and jobs and how they're kind of becoming more homogenized and more simplified, and that makes them more similar to each other. And there's questions and conversations about content and how content is even becoming more homogenized in a way because they're kind of very focused on doing samey type of content. And even the developers have talked about this, and we'll get into it at some point. But one thing that I really don't see talked about enough, because I feel like a lot of the time, if you even bring it up, people will just shout you down in the community, is that we don't really focus a lot on what the roles mean. And are we really meeting the potential of the roles? And that being DPS, tanking, and in this case, especially healing. And so I saw Illumination's takes on some of the things for healing, and I thought he did a really good job. It was around the time I released my video. I thought he did a phenomenal
Oh
job.
wow.
Yeah, it
Great
was
coincidence.
a great coincidence. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
figured, you know what? Let's sit down again. Let's have another conversation. We've got another person here to help bridge even more of the gap. Because for Lumi, from what I understand, I've done some raiding. I've done Savage and stuff like that. I haven't done any ultimates. And I haven't. I'm not going to say I'm a hardcore raider. I used to be a hardcore raider in 2.0, and I've dabbled here or there in different expansions. But your raiding experience exceeds mine, I think, by quite a bit.
I mean, yeah, I've played Final Fantasy ever since 2.0 myself, but I didn't like grow the courage to go into Savage until late Stormblood.
Okay.
But I have been an avid week one raider, very,
Wow.
very competitively ever since, for sure, the beginning
Wow.
of Shadowbringers. And I did take some extended breaks from the game because Party Finder was ruthless week one.
True.
And yeah, so I've been in and out of it, but in Walker especially, I think I have thousands of hours in raiding in
Wow.
Walker alone. So yeah, I've got a whole slew of topics to talk about here today, actually.
Sure,
So
sure,
Nice.
absolutely. Do you have much experience with the ultimate raids?
I do, actually. As a matter of fact, I have cleared a few of them. So not necessarily the most recent ones.
Sure.
DSR and top elude me because of, frankly, my disgust of the raiding community. We will
Ah,
probably have a chance to go into that, but
sure.
I have a lot of, let's call it, qualms with the very high end of rating. Now, granted, we're talking about
Interesting.
like the 90th percentile of players who
Sure.
more or less gatekeep or ultimates and the access therein. But
Hmm.
um, overall, yeah, I have quite a bit of ultimate experience as well. Although I'd usually deem it to not really be worth the effort in most cases.
Sure. Yeah, we've talked about we have like a content plan, I guess you could say, for doing content with George and I. And Ultimates is not on that. It's not to say that Ultimates aren't great content, but spending months and months to get one fight down is a time investment we're not willing to do. Doing hard fights
At
is
least
great and fun, but
yeah.
doing crazy punishing fights like that is there's better things for our time.
At least with our current time allotment,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
won't be doing that.
So
Yeah.
understandable. Well, let's get in proper to our conversation. The first thing I want to kind of touch on is um, where healers are today as compared to where they were in 2.0. Now, Lumi, I don't know if you did a ton of the old content in the past, but back in my day, when we were doing original 2.0 coils, we as healers were in a situation where you had to use your efficient heals and you healed most of the time. And if you didn't do that, then people either died or you ran out of mana. And so there was a huge focus on if you're a healer, you spend most of your time healing. If you used your damaging spells to a large extent, to a small extent you could, but to a large extent you would run out of mana if you started doing that. And so
Right.
MP management was really important. Healing consistently was very important. Using your most efficient spells and using your cooldowns properly, very important. Now we were level 50 at the time, so that's a huge, like smaller amount of skills that you get access to. And so today it's very, very different. We have probably double the amount of skills and abilities that we have today. And
Wow.
Yeah.
so it's a very different situation. One thing I'll note is I've noticed that as the game has gone on, we have shifted away from having complex or difficult classes or jobs to play and more focused on content that is complicated and difficult. It used to be more on one side and now it's kind of shifted to the other side. And so that may be an influence as to what's happening with all of the jobs and all of the roles, but we'll have to see. So Lumi, in your opinion, how do you feel like healing has evolved now in the most recent, I guess, 6.5, 6.0? How do you think, like, where have we arrived, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, my opinion on that is, I'm going to be blunt here. It's a bit abrasive to the majority of
Sure.
people, and it does spark a bit of controversy. But it is my humble opinion that the state of not only healing but supports in general, this would include the tanks as well, has basically been masking itself as like a lesser DPS degree. Like so, I'll say for example, it's best illustrated probably by an example.
Sure.
If your DPS contributed, say, I don't know, an arbitrary 90% of your raid's damage, and the supports contributed 10% of the raid's damage, I think that that's fair because it's a fair distribution of role responsibility. What I think we've done though is we have reallocated responsibility in the interest of attracting newer and frankly less how would you say, maybe less experienced players to be able to go into any level of content and clear it without being like particularly competent or like experienced with their class. So instead of now the DPS being held responsible for doing DPS, it is now the healer's responsibility to share in their responsibility to offset the otherwise contradictory ineptitude that
Mm.
would follow with the DPS being able to do their job effectively. So now
Hmm.
instead of DPS being responsible to do DPS, it's now everyone's responsibility to do DPS. Whereas tanks in the same vein, instead of tanks being just a lot of mitigation, they also now have a lot of self-sustain. So it offsets the healers not being able to do their job because
Hmm.
now everyone can heal. So in the interest of preserving a very, very user friendly and casual friendly raid environment, we have basically this system now where everyone shares in the roles that should be evenly distributed among role classes. So it undermines the entire Holy Trinity system. And I
Right.
don't mind content that is innately casually based, like duty roulettes, dungeons, but we're talking about the highest level of difficulty the game has to offer. We're talking about savage, we're talking about ultimates, you know and whenever you have a system that is fundamentally built around no one being responsible for everything and instead everyone's responsible for everything, there's no uniqueness that can be attributed to any given role or class, and I think that's a fundamentally flawed system in my opinion.
Sure. I actually 100% agree, especially with that last part. I one of the things I really don't like in the game is doing alliance raids. I think the spectacle of alliance raids are amazing. They're super fun. For George, for your information, the alliance raids are when there's 3 full parties of 8. So it's 8 parties
Okay.
all together, and they're going and doing these like raid content. The thing I don't like about that content is my personal contribution is barely felt. I could basically AFK and it wouldn't matter. We would basically pull through. Now, obviously I wouldn't AFK in an alliance raid, that'd be freaking rude. But the idea is that if I was to AFK in an 8-man raid, which is the majority of the endgame content is 8-man, we wouldn't pass. You would not be able to get that content done for the most part. There's probably some exceptions here or there, especially when it comes to healers, unfortunately. But, you know, it's something that your contribution is going to be felt. And to what Lumi is saying here, like your contribution in your specific role isn't being felt as much because everyone's basically playing at either literally a DPS or they're playing at being a DPS. And I think that it's probably the wrong direction to go. I understand that they really wanted to bring in this direction so that they could placate people who are more casual or just make the game easier in general. But as Lumi said, like this isn't the normal level of raids that is affected by this. This is like the savage tier at minimum that is affected by this as well. And I just don't think that we should be having everyone move towards a DPS centric way of playing, especially when we're supposed to have 3 defined, very different ways of playing. Not to such an extreme degree of difference, but at least enough that when I'm playing a DPS, I feel like I am having a different experience than when I'm playing a healer, and then I should also be having another experience when I'm playing a tank. And especially with tank, it does not feel like there's much of a difference between a, you know, essentially wet noodle DPS, which is tank, and, you know, a DPS itself.
And
Healers
DPS,
are a little bit different, but, you know, there's still a lot of DPS that's happening on the healer side, be it because the healers have way too much healing power, or the raids themselves just don't output enough damage or consistent damage.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So this brings a couple questions here that I have.
Sure.
You mentioned just a little bit ago, Graham, that it seems like the game's been shifting away from making the difficulty being the actual playing of the class to the actual content that you're doing.
Yes.
Right? So it seems like the classes themselves have gotten simpler over time.
Yes.
Is
You know
this-
how like
is-
we've done a lot of content in the base game and those fights were kind of boring. They were a little slow. There wasn't a ton happening in the boss fights that we were doing in the base game and in the first expansion. It's because classes used to be more complicated. They used to have more things going on.
Is this combining of roles, or more like merging of blurring the lines between the roles? Is this a byproduct of simplifying the classes, or is this like a second ticker in the thing that's you know, maybe not making classes the way you like them? Is this 2 different things, or is one the product of the other? It's my first question.
Sure. Do you
What
want
do
to
you
tackle that, Lumi? Do you have if you don't have an answer for it, I'll give it a shot.
No, I got an answer specifically from the healing side of things.
Sure.
But
Okay.
I won't pretend to have extensive experience in other roles. So on behalf of the healers, I will say, however, that in Heaven's Word and, you know, in the early, you know, portions of the game, you know, a very well-known example of this was something the beloved cleric stance, right? Everyone talks about cleric stance as the premier example. So to keep things consistent, Cleric Stance, if you don't know, was a toggleable buff that sacked a portion of your healing in exchange for extra damage and vice versa. So you could
Okay.
swap between the masquerading DPS that is now essentially untoggleable that we have today, and then you could toggle back into a more Healy stance. So you could shift your responsibilities in a dynamic fashion over the course of a fight. And this level of complexity has been otherwise diluted nowadays by the fact that the classes, you know, the pushback that was given by the community at large was that oh well, we have jobs and we do things outside of the game. The game's too hard. We just want to chill. We want to play something that's vibey, whatever the case may be. So, and that's fine. I don't think that there's anything fundamentally wrong with making the game, accessible to people that, don't play the game for a living. I don't think that you should have a 3,000 hour mandate to be able to get your foot in the door. But at the same time, I don't think that you should be making every class equivalent to munching on crayons for, just the simple fact that, oh, we want as many people to enjoy this as possible. The reality is that some things are meant for certain people and some things aren't meant for certain people. And I think that we need to, as a community, make a distinction between content that, is exclusive not being necessarily a bad thing. So when people look at content that is catered towards the upper echelon of gameplay and optimization, we think of that as innately discriminatory, and we kind of interpret that as a bad thing. That is not a bad thing. It's just meant for people who want to take the game to the next level, and it caters and rewards people for playing the game at that level. It gives them something to do. It's an incentive. So back then, the incentive to keep playing the game was to master all of these cool little nuances of your class. So you had the cleric stance, and you had the double dot scholar, and you had arrow 3, and all of these different things that kind of just made healers somewhat unique, but not over the top. Whereas now we've kind of exchanged this where every class you can master in 30 hours, and now, you can pretty much conquer any level of difficult content, whether it be Savage or otherwise, by pulling up a YouTube guide, playing at roughly 60% efficiency, and, just going at it for a week. And I don't think that this brute force approach is necessarily fair to the veteran players who have dedicated their time into something that they really love.
Sure.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so as those classes, I think to what Lumi is saying, I think it is a little bit of both. I think they wanted to make the content a little bit easier when it comes to healing, and they homogenized the classes and simplified them a little bit, which took away some of their complexity, which kind of streamlined them into you can now DPS much more often without this cleric stance, and the content is easier, so you have to heal less, and so now you can focus even more on DPS. And so it does seem like it's a combination of the two.
Okay, so then my other question, kind of in addition to that, is how was it then and how is it now? Like, if you're playing single player stuff, going through the story and all that stuff, like, was it hard as a healer to like the fights that you do in the story aren't really that hard, like, let's be honest. Especially like the ones that require like single player and everything. But like, did it take longer as a healer? Was it just scaled down for people playing healer classes, or how did that go?
Yeah, you're talking like 2.0 back in the day?
Yes. Yeah.
So for sure, like in 2.0 coils, I remember doing the Caduceus fight where you fight a giant snake. And I specifically remember that the healing in that fight was just so grueling when we were first getting into it, where I had to cast Cure 1. I have Cure 1 and Cure 2. Cure 1 heals a little bit, but it doesn't cost a lot of mana. It's very efficient. And I have a chance when I cast Cure 1 that Cure 2, which is a huge heal, but it costs a lot of mana and it's not as efficient. But I have a chance when I cast Cure 1 that Cure 2 for the next 15 seconds will be free mana. And so I can just cast it. So it makes more sense to efficiently do these small heals over time, these consistent heals, and then I get a proc for free Cure 2, and then I can use that to kind of make the difference of if I'm losing ground on certain things. So the majority of my time as a healer was healing the main tank, because the boss would have auto attacks, much like players do, and the HP would consistently go down in chunks. And so I had to keep that HP going up and down and up and down all the time. And then with the co-healer that I had, they would focus more on the party itself. They would see, the Caduceus snake would shoot out poison pools and it would hit people. And if they stood in it too long, they'd take even more damage. And there were ads that had to be dealt with as well. So, there were things that the other healer had to do. They focused more on the party. I focused more on the tank. But sometimes our roles would kind of come to a head if, okay, a lot of damage is coming up on the tank. So we have to both get ready for that. Or area damage is coming out for the party. Let's go ahead and we'll focus on that together, and we'll do something with the tank to get them kind of squared away, and now we can focus on the party. So it was something that gave your full engagement, like almost all the time. And a lot of times, if you didn't have anything to heal, which was quite rare, you would just kind of chill for a second and let your mana go up, because as you're not casting, you're getting this regen back of your mana, right? Just naturally. So yeah, it was definitely something that you engaged with all the time. Nowadays, healing is very much I can throw you a couple spells, and then I could probably spend a huge amount of time after that just like dealing damage and not even worrying about engaging with the healing whatsoever. And in about like 30 seconds after I've done a bunch of damage, I can throw you a couple more spells and get you right topped back up. And now I can do like 30 seconds of more of damage. So it's like 5 seconds of healing versus 30 seconds of damage is kind of what we're looking at and what it's become.
And
If I may,
yeah,
Yes,
go
of
ahead,
course.
Mami, go ahead.
I just wanted to append a quick point to that to just like
Of
further
course.
illustrate to the any like would be like not people in the know, I suppose, if you want to call them that. Yeah, Savage Fights in particular, there are two types of abilities. For those that don't know, you have GCDs and OGCDs. GCDs
Right.
being the spells that usually cost mana and they share the cooldown with one another, usually 2.5 seconds. And OGCDs are usually what would be considered free spells. They don't cost mana, they don't cost resources, and they don't share cooldowns. That being said, Savage Fights nowadays are essentially like it's kind of a game because if you want to master a Savage Fight, what it ultimately boils down to is you simply allocate the OGCDs at your disposal at set intervals across a 10-minute fight, and you go back to spamming the same button for the remainder of the fight. So you don't even use your GCD budget. You just use your free spells, and if your party, can't get by with that, then, usually the typical healer response is, oh, well, too bad, it's someone else's fault. So it's kind of breeding this I don't know, backwards mentality where healing it's not only not needed, it's demonized because healing is inefficient, and God forbid you're not doing the thing that's the most efficient. So, at the higher levels, all you're doing is, okay, I put my temperance here, I put my lily bell here, and I put my macrocosmos here, and then congratulations, you're going back to spamming Malefic and Glare all game. So
Right.
95% of your playtime at a conservative figure is what you're doing as DPS, as a healer, to put that into
Right.
perspective,
Wow.
which is absolutely absurd.
100% agree. Yeah.
That's interesting, huh? So I guess, I had some questions about single player, but we'll skip past that because I think this is a little bit more interesting. So it sounds like to me, what you guys are saying is overall difficulty, the higher end raids, the difficulty factor is still there, but the frustration comes from the fact that the difficulty isn't necessarily anymore from playing the class. It's rather just participating in the objective. If that makes sense, that distinction.
Well, in
Right.
part. In part. So
Okay.
imagine I promised you tomorrow morning I was gonna make you the most amazing breakfast ever. And then you get out of bed in the morning and I give you one pancake and a raspberry. That's essentially the equivalent of what we're dealing with, is because we're
Sure.
promised these high difficulty raids, and you would think from a healer's perspective, oh wow, high difficulty, so I'm going to get to clutch a fight and save people and rescue them from death and heal and watch the HP bars go up. Because you have to understand, as a healer, in the same way that a DPS player, like a black mage players get their dopamine rush from hitting that direct critical hit Xenoglossy and just seeing
Yeah. The HP go
90,000
down.
damage. Yeah, you
Yeah.
you get your dopamine hits as a DPS player by seeing those massive crit numbers, right? Well, from a healer's perspective, we don't get our dopamine release from spamming glares or DPS skills. We get our dopamine, from these little things and on the corner of the screen called HP bars, and we like to watch those go up, and we like fat green numbers. So, if you're
You
promised of
sound like
high
Graham.
well, yeah, I mean, it's like
Yep.
if you're promised these high difficulty fights and
Yeah.
you spend 95% of the time doing what you don't get your dopamine, release from, then why are you even bother playing healer? You might as well just go play summoner, because it's just, I mean, I'm going to hurt a few summoner players' feelings here. No flame to you guys, by the way. But you might as well go play summoner, because it is just as difficult as smashing glare on white mage. So
Right.
why are you playing white mage if you just want to smash glare all the time?
Right.
So,
Interesting.
you
So
know,
it's the fantasy. That's something that Graham's mentioned to me a few times. It's the fantasy of the actual role, right? Like the RPing, the role playing of the role in a sense
absolutely.
that's missing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you guys think that the game's been heading in this direction then? Do they just not understand that the actual fantasy and satisfaction of healing is an important factor in the healer class?
It's
Well,
a multifaceted problem and solution, and I'll lay out a couple of these. So one of them is the bulk of people who play games like dealing damage. It's just generally a thing.
True.
People like killing stuff. They like dealing big numbers, seeing the HP of the enemy drop and whatnot. That's totally fair. So naturally, you're going to have a situation. I mean, you've played Overwatch. You've seen that the healer queues and the tank queues are not as as great as, or I guess inversely, the DPS queues are super bad. But if you play tank or healer, it's much quicker to get a freaking
Depends
no.
on the season and all that
Depends
stuff.
on the
Yeah,
season,
depends.
sure.
Yeah.
So generally,
As a Zenyatta main, I played a lot of healer, but I like the dichotomy of Zenyatta where you basically deal damage like
and are
really
healing.
and are healing. Yeah,
Sure,
I like that a lot.
he's
And I
like
like
a
classes in other games that heal by dealing damage. I know there's a class like that in Final Fantasy, but
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and then basically what they wanted to do is, okay, we have a low population of tanks and healers. What are we going to do to make this population grow? And their initial solution, and it's really still the solution today, is we'll just make tanking and healing so not just simplistic, but also easy, so that anyone can do it, right? We'll open the door so wide that we'll catch as many people as possible, even people who don't know if they like healing or tanking at all. We'll basically make you a watered down DPS with some of these side, healing and side tanking on the side, right? It's just a side objective. Really, you're a DPS. Don't worry about it. Right, so that's what they've kind of done on that front. The content in general has gotten easier, so the requirement of healing has gone down, and the tanks don't really have any huge responsibility within their role. They just kind of tank. They have some cooldowns they have to actively pop. I don't want to disparage too much, but it's certainly they're much more closer to DPS than the healers are. So that's those are two really big things that have caused them to kind of pull away from making healers really have to, like Lumi was saying, when I hear difficult fight as a healer, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be pushed to my limits. I'm going to be casting healing spells the whole time. I'm going to be struggling to get these people alive. But in reality, it's difficult in the sense of there's a lot of difficult mechanics, but it's not a commentary on my role, right? It's not going to be difficult for the tank to stay alive by managing like some kind of defensive system. It's just a difficult set of mechanics in the content itself. And I think the other thing to answer your question in another way, is they've really focused on expanding the difficulty of content through the mechanics of things, right? As we talked about before. So it's a lot of factors that are kind of coming together to dilute what tanking and healing is. And as someone who is a diehard healer at this point, and it's really, it hurts, man. It's just like, I don't want to play a DPS.
Yeah.
I like DPS on occasion, but the thing that the dopamine rush for me, as Lumi said, getting that HP up. I want to see the HP. I want to be the guy, not because it's a god complex kind of thing, but I want to be the guy that saves my friends, right? I want to be like, you go down or you're going down, you're nervous, you're worried, you stepped in something you weren't supposed to, you got hit by something, and you're thinking, oh, I messed up. I'm dead. Something's gonna happen. And I want to be the guy that goes shoulder to shoulder with you and says, we got this, brother. Get up. Let's keep going. We can do this together. Let's go. Nice. Right? And then we forge forward. I want to be the guy lifting up the team so that everyone can do the job they need to do, even if they're making mistakes. But it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like I'm the guy who, a mistake happened. All right, there's an OGCD. I'm back to spamming glare.
Yep.
It doesn't feel like I'm an
Exactly.
active participant in lifting up my team anymore. It feels just like I'm there for when mistakes happen or when the scripted damage comes out finally, and then I can do a little bit of work in my role. I want to engage with my role, and I can't. There's just nothing for me to engage with, or I have too much healing power, and anytime something comes up, I can resolve it in just a second. So
That's rough. I can certainly sympathize with that feeling of getting your role and the fantasy of playing it taken away from you. So it sounds like this is less of the reason why it's been moving this way, less of a developer intent and more so a developing necessity, right? Just given how long the queue times were and all that stuff. Is that
well,
what
the
I'm
problem
understanding?
is the queue times never got fixed. We still need tanks and we still need healers in almost the same quantity that we needed before. So
So it's like the worst
this
of both worlds.
that's right. We've
Yep.
basically had a
Okay.
lose-lose situation where those queues have not been fixed, and now I imagine that a lot of people were pushed out of, at minimum, the healer role. I can't speak too much for tanking, but I know for sure I've met people who moved from healing to DPS because essentially they were not healing as much anymore and they were dealing more DPS, and they thought, well, if I'm going to
Yeah.
be DPSing, I might as well play a class that's got a full rotation and some interesting things to do while I DPS. Why would I continue to play a healer that I literally push glare the whole freaking time, one button for the whole raid? Why would I do that? And so they moved away from healing. And I'm sure there are some DPS that said, you know what? I want a fast queue and I'll be DPSing anyways on the healer. So I'll just go over there and do that. I'm sure. But I
Yeah.
think the bigger sin is underserving the people who don't have a place anymore, right? Giving DPS an alternative to skip the queue and do DPS still is unacceptable, I think. I think if you want to play DPS, you go play DPS. If I want to play a healer, actually a healer, I feel like I should have that role and that ability to do so and be able to fill that fantasy, and I just don't have that.
So, do you guys think this is something that could potentially be fixed by like introducing classes, like different healing classes? Like maybe there's some classes of healer that, like I said, I'm
Mhm.
not necessarily as much into healing as Graham is, but I do enjoy the occasional running the occasional healer class. And I particularly enjoy the classes that are, the yin and yang. I
Sure.
heal as much damage as I deal. Usually there's like multipliers and stuff like
Sure,
that
sure.
in different games. But when you talk about the healer fantasy, that healer fantasy and that specific role is something that I personally jive with a lot. So do you think that this is something where maybe they went a little too heavy-handed and changed all the healer classes when they could have either introduced new ones or tweaked some and introduced new
It's
ones? Like,
it's great that you're saying that, George, because I actually 100% agree with what you're saying, which on the face seems contradictory. I think there should be a job that is focused on dealing damage and healing simultaneously. I think absolutely, because that is absolutely a healing archetype. It shouldn't be the
mhm,
main healing archetype because a
yes, it
section of
usually
healers likes
isn't.
that. And it usually
Yeah,
isn't, exactly. But
yeah,
we have Sage. Sage has a thing where I can put basically a buff on
well,
someone.
that's
It
true.
lasts
Yeah, yeah.
forever and I can shift it around to anyone I want. And when I deal damage, I do a small inefficient heal, but it's a heal and you can do a lot of healing through that method. And so if we had just the Sage that was this DPS focused healer, awesome. I think it's fucking awesome. And I'd even play
Mhm.
it occasionally. And in fact, I like Sage right now. I like White Mage more, but I do like Sage a lot. It's my second favorite healer. Now, the problem is all of our healers are like this, except the three other healers don't heal at all when they deal damage. They are just dealing damage most of the time. And so I
Mm,
think those three healers that are outside
yeah.
of that should be focused entirely on healing, like completely on healing. And then the Sage should be doing that healing. They should have that same requirement of healing, but they facilitate that through damage.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just begs the question as to why didn't they do that? Do we know? Like, has there been any? Has Yoshida shared any of his intents as far as the
Sure.
healing class?
Yeah,
or
well,
anything like
maybe we
that?
can shift now to looking to the future as you're asking that. So Sage wasn't out until just this last expansion, Endwalker. And so
Okay.
there hasn't been a solution. If like they had that idea to pivot healers like that, there wasn't that kind of extra addition to healing that you could do this healing and DPS. Theoretically, now they could pivot the other three healers into more healing focused and then have Sage be the one that's a little bit damage focused. And they could do that in the future. But this in lies the problem, right? No one in the community is talking about this. No big people are talking about this. We just had the
Yeah.
media tour. Nobody asked anyone on specifically Yoshida, but nobody asked Yoshida about what's going on with healers and or even broadly what's going on with roles in general, because tanks are in a similar position, I think, where it's not really about tanking anymore. It's about being a limp DPS. And so
Absolutely.
like we are in a situation where nobody's talking about it.
Hmm.
It's not something on the mind of the developers and the people. And I think part of that is because, as I mentioned before, if you have these kind of opinions that healers need to focus on healers, the community will shout you down. They will say you're awful
That's
and that's
unfortunate.
boring and it's dumb. And this is coming from a community that claims that they are very inclusive and they're very understanding and you should speak your mind and it's okay to criticize X, Y, or Z, because that is not the case when it comes to certain topics. Yeah, that's for the
Not at
approved
all.
topics, no problem. But this topic, you better keep your mouth shut.
But Lumi, by your sarcastic laugh, it seems like you've had a similar experience.
Listen, I'm gonna look. This community, I'm gonna say it right now. This is like probably my most nuclear take on 14. 14
boy.
masquerades as this community that is just so accepting and so open and so not, it's like, and I've seen what true toxicity looks like. I come from League of Legends. Okay, I've been there. I've done that. I've experienced both ends of the spectrum, both hyper aggressive and passive aggressive.
Sure.
If you've ever played League, the hyper aggressive toxicity that exists there, Final Fantasy XIV is there, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. The same intensity and fervent toxicity that you get in League is dealt to you in plastic kindness in 14. So what people will do is you'll make a mistake and they'll give you some, oh man, excellent play, smiley face, or it's just this plastic masquerading as this just amazing no. Final Fantasy
Okay.
is a community that there are things you're allowed to say, there are things you're allowed to have an opinion on, there are things you're allowed to do. The moment that you contradict any of the aforementioned points, you are met with immediate pushback and immediate just dare I say slander. So
Okay.
yeah, 14, and this is, you will find this particularly true in the RP communities and in the high-end rating communities. Although if you're a casual, you just log in, do your daily roulettes, talk to some people, whatever, mess with your glam plates. You'll never run into this issue, right? But
Casual right here.
yeah,
That's right.
if that's you, if what I'm saying is completely alien to you, congratulations. You probably will never have to encounter this. But do know that if you venture into the wrong corner of the community, be it rating or the RP scene, if it's all fun and games until you tell someone, like unsolicited advice. God forbid someone doesn't, I don't know, a tank buster is going to eat a tank buster or a tank's going to eat a tank buster that will kill them, and they don't pop a 30% mit. And then after the next pull comes and you see the pre-pull counter, hey, maybe we should, start popping our cooldowns here. Oh yeah, well now you've got 4 people ransacking you about how you're toxic, right? So
Jeez.
you see, so is it accepting?
Well.
Yes, but no.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced. I mean, our dislike ratio on the nuclear hot take video is it speaks for itself. I mean, there's a lot of comments
I
that
saw
were
there
just
was
like,
a lot of comments. I didn't even read them because there were way too many for me to read. I just like, oh wow, this is getting good engagement. Little did I know.
yes,
Comments flaming you until you told me about
insults.
it.
This guy's an idiot. There was tons of stuff. Which, you know what? For the most part, I think a lot of the comments were critical but constructive. There were some that were just insulting, and those just wash over me. I don't give a frick about those. But
Yeah.
the ones there were a lot of people that just said I was wrong for wanting healers to focus on healing and wrong for wanting tanks to focus on tanking. And it's just you can't, and that's what I knew. Like I named that video Nuclear Hot Takes because I knew that people would push back against that kind of thing. But I can't see why. Why does it matter if
I was
you
just going to ask that, right? Because like I think it's totally fine and within people's realm of they're totally allowed to say, you know what, I disagree with you. I don't think healers should focus on healing. I don't think this and that. But why like the pushback of like, no, I don't want that, or no, I don't want that for all classes? That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from you, right? Like,
Yep.
it's fine to like, oh no, like I want X, Y, and Z class to stay kind of like this, but A, B, C, sure, that can be more healing centric. I don't know why there's such a pushback for like a middle ground between the two camps.
Yep.
That's interesting.
It's a great question, George. I don't know either. Because listen, if you're playing a healer or tank right now and you like that they're focused on DPS and you feel threatened by the fact that we want healing and tanking to be more about a defensive play and a healing play, you can just go over to playing DPS.
Yeah,
right?
you're not a real support player.
Yeah, you're not a support player. You just go play DPS. You will have just as much fun. Actually, you'll have more fun playing DPS. And so there's no reason for anyone to be upset. If you are the kind of tank or healer that likes a tank or healer that has that defensive thing but also has the DPS focus, no problem. We got Sage for you, and then maybe we can carve out like Warrior or something that can be that damage focused tank and has like different kind of responsibilities, but it's still mostly tanky, right? No problem. Like the concessions can be made to cater to everyone, but the roles need to focus on the roles, right? We need to fulfill the fantasy of these roles. It's not fair to people who want to play. Like at this point, I get more gratification from playing an indie game called Mini Healer, which is a MMO style single player healer game, than I'm getting out of playing the MMO that has healing in it, which is insane. Right? It just doesn't make any sense. I want to be able to have the fun. And so now this gets us to what's happening with 7.0. I'll launch this off by saying White Mage has an ability called Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind is a haste spell, essentially, or a haste ability that increases your casting speed by 20%. Now, it's a great freaking tool to do like rezzing and emergency rezzing and stuff like that when you don't have swift cast to do it instantly, or getting some extra heals out if things are really hitting the fan. Now, for most of the changes for healers, I think they've been totally fine. But this one particular change in 7.0 worries me in a sense, because I'm worried that maybe even unconsciously, the development team is shifting healers more and more in a direction of damage. Because now when you pop this haste, you get 3 stacks of Glare 4. Right now we cast Glare 3. That's like our primary damage thing. And Glare 4 is this like instant cast 3-stack high damage ability that you're going to get when you cast Swift, or when you cast this haste. But it's like, wait a second. Why are we getting more damage stuff on our DPS? Is this an indication of what the development team is thinking? Are they listening to all of these people shouting and shouting for more DPS on the healers? We want more intense. Like, people literally ask for DPS rotations and mechanics on the healers. They say that the DPS is boring on healers. We need mechanics. We need like rotations like the DPS class on the healers. What are you talking about? That's crazy. That is insanity. We should be asking for DPS to be removed from the healers. And we should
Could not agree more.
And people say, whoa, Graham, you want the DPS to be removed from the healers? Well, that's going to make healing freaking boring. We're going to stand there and do nothing. No, because at the same time, we want more damage to come from the bosses so that we have something to do. We want to engage with our class more, right? So I'm worried that it may not be a conscious thing. They may not be saying we're going to push healers to be more damage focused. But I'm worried that because there's such a outcry of people who, in my opinion, are very misguided when it comes to healing, that are causing the dev team to move more and more towards this healers are dealing damage mentality. And so 7.0, the developers have said, Yoshida have said, they're more focused right now on revitalizing content. So instead of having samey kind of fights like mechanics you've seen before, they're trying to really come outside of the box of like, what can we do to make fights unique again, fun again, interesting again, like more than they were. They've always been fun, but they've been getting kind of samey. So how can we revitalize that? And so they said not a lot is going to change on the job side for 7.0, but in 8.0, that's when we're really going to focus on the uniqueness of jobs. They didn't say roles, they said jobs. We're going to look at what makes a job unique and try and lean into that once they've got the content side handled. So I think that now of all the times, it's very important to start this conversation in the lead up to 8.0 because I want roles to be on that list of things that they're focused on in 8.0. I want them to think about what makes a healer, or what makes not a healer, but a white mage. Well, I want that to be looked through at the lens of a healer role, not as a how can we make white mages a DPS in some way, but also keep some healing.
So don't the two kind of have to go hand in hand though? Like it sounds like if you're focusing on the fights and the content, as you said, like if you take out healing or sorry, DPS away from the healer and you leave the fights as they are,
right?
Won't that just like you said, leave less things for the healers to do? Because it's not like the boss is outputting more damage, so it's not like there's more healing for you to do. So how can I don't want to be a downer, but how can they achieve what you're trying to achieve if it seems like their approach isn't that, right? Like it seems to me you can't separate the two.
They're very closely linked, yes.
Yeah, and so it seems to me like it's more like things that should come out at the same time, and if they're coming out with fights first, and it would be fights that require more healing, yet currently the healers deal less healing, how will anyone be able to beat those fights, right? It almost seems like it should be the other way. First, they tweak the roles so that, the roles are in the spots that maybe you would like. Maybe that's not what the broader community wants, and we can talk about the uphill battle that probably will be later. But it seems to me that the approach should be, let's tweak the classes first, and then let's create content that fits those tweaked classes, rather than let's tweak the content first, but if we tweak the classes later so that those new classes now meet this new content, until we get to that point in the classes, what happens there? Can anyone beat these fights? Like, will people die because there's, healers can't heal as much, yet, more damage is coming out? Do you get what I'm trying to say?
100%. Yeah, I don't think that we can have these raid contents focus on more damage in that sense until they understand what they want for the jobs first. I think they have to come to the realization that they want the jobs to be focused on healing first before they can start making content around that concept.
So that's what I'm getting at, right? So, because if they're releasing content right now, fights that aren't necessarily focused
I see what you're saying.
Providing healing opportunities, I don't know what the next expansion will be called. Will it be 8.0? 8.0 when it comes out?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it comes out, won't the problem not be fixed? It's almost like they're going to be more entrenched into it by doing the fights first.
It's possible.
Does that make sense?
It's certainly possible. But I think if we have to play in reality, right? And so 7.0 is already coming out, and anything that the development team has set in sights is already set in stone. And so I'm looking to play the long game. I'm willing to play my hand for 8.0 and then see what we can manage on that front, because that's still totally in flux. So having this conversation now, I do generally agree with you that we need to put the horse before the cart. Unfortunately, the devs have, they have their own agenda. And so I want to get ahead of that kind of 8.0 situation where we can, because you can retroactively change the damage to some degree. Like the boss is still generally auto. But yeah, there are some fights where bosses generally don't even auto attack, and maybe you just can't do anything about those fights.
If I could,
Of
I
course.
have a,
Yes, please.
I got a point on that. So the first thing is that I find that the community at large usually struggles with the concept that two things can be true at once. So when we say that we don't want healers to do a whole lot of damage or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean I think that all damage should be removed from healers. I think that healers and tanks as a collective unit, as being the supports of the party, doing 40% or more of the total raid DPS is an absurd number. I think that 20% is something more acceptable. More on that point, I think that in an ideal utopian world, reallocation of stats would be probably the best thing that would serve the community. Because the usual pushback you'll get from the average indoctrinated Final Fantasy XIV player nowadays is that when you make any conversation about changing healers and reducing their damage, oh, well, how are we going to meet DPS checks? It's very simple. There's this thing called a percentage. So what you do is you take 75% of the total damage that the healers contribute as a unit, and the tanks similarly 75% of that, and you add that together, and then you reallocate the lost potency to the DPS classes. Similarly, you reduce tank healing and self-sustain by 50%. Again, an arbitrary number. You can tune that to however you like.
Yep.
And then reallocate the lost potency to healers. And then all of a sudden, magically, it does not invalidate the old fights or any new fights. You're simply
True.
giving,
That's a good point.
you're getting rigid. You're basically making these categories of, oh wow, all of a sudden healers are now responsible for healing because all of the healing potency in the party is on them. You should not be able to, you should not fail a DPS check because your healer died. That's absurd.
Yeah.
Similarly,
Right.
you should not be allowed to live through a pool where both healers go down. If both
Right.
healers have weakness for 2 minutes in a savage fight, you deserve to die. Right?
Right.
This is role responsibility.
Right.
And that goes back to my initial point earlier on in the episode where I say everyone being a little bit of everything is counterintuitive to the responsibilities given innate to each role, because now being a good healer means also being a good DPS. So you no longer actually have to be a good DPS, because anything that you can't do as a competent DPS player, the healer will pick up the slack. And I
Right.
think that's counterintuitive to the distinction that's meant to be made between the aforementioned roles.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Which
100%.
which brings me back to, like, why is there such pushback in the community? It seems like you guys are kind of in the minority in this.
Oh yeah.
Is this something because, I don't know, more, yeah, I don't
I have a
know. Like,
theory.
yes, please
Yes, please.
enlighten me,
What would you
'cause
say is the biggest reason behind
yeah.
that, Lumi?
Well, the problem is that first of all, we have to look at the solution. The solution obviously would be a reform of either the class system or the fight design. Naturally, the class system reform is going to be much easier than the fight design reform, because reforming hundreds of fights that have already been cleared will feel unfair, because then you're going to divide the community into, oh, well, you cleared the fight before it was changed, or you cleared the fight
Mm,
after it was changed, so your clear isn't valid. So naturally, you have to reform the jobs themselves. I think that would be easy to do. The problem is that you can't reform a system right now, because in doing so, you have to innately make the game harder and more difficult, and people don't like not being able to do things, because people nowadays, it is my opinion at least anyway, to preface that, it is my opinion that people nowadays like quick and easy convenience. They don't like needing to work for something anymore. And the
mm,
idea of tackling something that's challenging or daunting, say, I don't know, mastering a class that you're passionate about, is out of the question. Because classes right now, healers specifically, and tanks too, I'll point that out, tanks are just melee DPS with no positionals. So if you're a bad melee DPS player, you can just play tank and have your fantasy fulfilled without having to deal with the consequences of being a bad melee DPS player, you see. So it's an escape outlet. Whereas if you're a bad caster
mm,
player and you have no idea how to do your rotation properly and you don't want to humiliate yourself, you can simply play a white mage and spam glare. It's ironic to me that people want harder rotations on healers when they are actively using it as an escape outlet or vector to avoid needing to be good at the job that they actually are meant to play. So
Sure.
you can't
mm.
reform healers or tanks into being healers or tanks, because in doing so you're offsetting the escape outlet that's otherwise implemented to help people, because the roles right now are meant to cater towards the what we would call it in the league. We have a system called autofill. So if you're an auto-filled support, you're not actually a support. You're playing support to keep the queue times low.
Yes.
Right. So you're
Yes.
not actually a support player. And I think that if you truly believe that more damage is healthy game design on a healer, you are not a healer. You are a melee or caster or phys ranged player playing healer because you frankly can't play your respective job adequately in the content that you're attempting to tackle, and you're using it as a vector to compensate. And I don't think that's healthy. I think you're better served doing what we all did as veterans, and you're gonna suck in the beginning. Everyone does, but I think that there's beauty in growth, and you would be well served just playing what's truly meant for you and what you're passionate about, and just growing into the shoes that you have to fill. That's the gameplay progression narrative that is so integral to MMORPGs. You're meant to grow. You start off at level 1 for a reason.
Yep.
Embrace the climb.
True. Yeah, I think the game
Real
would be
quick, you drove that knife in deep and twisted it there, Lumi. That was great to listen to.
Yeah, I think to what Lumi is saying, I really do think that there is a large spectrum of players. There are people who want deeper rotations who are already committed to jobs. Like they're not afraid of doing that, and they're already playing like Black Mage or something that's got a more intricate rotation. And they want more. They want something of more depth. And I don't necessarily think that people asking for that are also the people that are playing healers. Just as as an aside, I think the people who are playing healers that are really supposed to be playing DPS because that's what they like doing, I think they're keeping their mouths shut about all of that. Now, that being said, I think the game would really, really benefit from, in some games, especially fighting games, there's a list of characters and they all have like a rating of difficulty. So I think that people who want to play White Mage to be a DPS because they're too intimidated to play a more intricate rotation, there should be some DPS classes that are like 1 out of 5-star difficulty. They're just not difficult at all. And so, Dancer, yeah.
That's why I love Dancer.
There you
Dancer,
go.
Summoner,
Yeah.
and we have those. And I think that that's fundamentally good game design. You want to have, if you want to be ambitious and you want to have that hard rotation and you want to be Mega Mind, Giga Brain, and you want to do all of these things and play Black Mage, bro, hats off to Black Mage players. Me, I could never, right? And that's just it. I don't think that Black Mage should be dumbed down to make me able to play it.
Correct.
Right? And it is meant for people who really are passionate about that sort of thing. And similarly, if you don't really want to chase that and you just want a chill, vibey atmosphere that you can just play and enjoy, but we've got that. We've got Dancer, we've got Summoner, we've got Warrior. We've got these classes for each respective role archetype that are meant to get you in the door. But I think that the argument being made in terms of, we're going to, cut the identity off of this class in the name of making it simpler or cater more towards us. It's like, no, I don't think that's necessarily fair, because classes are, so diverse and should be so diverse that they're meant for a specific type of player. And I think that, you're absolutely right. I 100% agree.
Yeah, I think it really, this is why this conversation is so important, I guess, in kind of closing here, is I just think it's so important that we shift in the shift of making in 8.0, in the shift of focusing on the identity of jobs. I think it's important to have classes and jobs, well, just jobs, but jobs that have more complexity. People are asking for more complexity, and I think we should be delivering on that front with things like Black Mage, maybe Samurai. I don't play Samurai at all. I literally have never played it before. But as an example, like we have these, like we can just make classes. So we have a spectrum of here's the high difficulty classes, and then here's the lower difficulty classes, and just make it obvious. Just be honest. I don't know if the development team is afraid of saying that here's the high difficulty and here's the low difficulty ones. They don't want to insult anyone, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. But if we're going to go in 8.0 to really focus on bringing the identity of these classes together, we need to decide, we need to come and be honest about who's complicated and who's easy. So that way we can shift everyone in their proper place. If you want to play easy stuff on DPS side or hard stuff, we've got something for you. Now, and then in the same token, we need to start having an honest conversation about healing and tanking. Healers need to be focused on healing. We need to move the people who want to deal damage out of that role, and we need to put them where they belong in the DPS role. I don't dislike those people. I just think they're in the wrong spot, and my position of the things that I want to do is being damaged as a result. And the same thing, I don't play tank, but the same thing extends for tanking. I think the tanking needs to be focused on tanking. I think there needs to be intricate mechanics that you need to, full rotation of things that you need to do to stay alive. I think your damage should be low and your defensive capabilities should be high and they should be engaging. And I think that's what the tank should be focusing on. Now, I'm not an experienced tank. I don't know. I don't have the greatest solutions for tanking specifically, but for healing, definitely I'm looking for HP bars to be going up and down more consistently and my casting of damage to be basically, 5-10% of my time, if that. And so I think that, I just hope that this is a conversation that the community at large can have as we're building up to 8.0. I know there's a lot of 7.0 hype. The media tour stuff just happened, but it's sad, man. It's sad to me that we weren't in the media tour, but it's sad to me that nobody asked this question. No one's thinking about it. No one's allowed to talk about it. And I will continue to talk about this until it comes to fruition. Or it's clear if the developer said, no, we're not, healing is never going to be this, Graham. It's not going to be something that you're going to get. We're not going to give it to you. It's never going to be like that. Then, okay, I can at least cut my ties with Final Fantasy and walk away, because I'm not going to play a game long term when I don't have the prospect of doing proper healing. And that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. But I would really love the developers to think about what these roles mean and what they want them to be, and then make a decision. And I would have loved to be able to sit down and talk to Yoshi about it, because no one's talking about it, as I said. And it's just, it feels like, and like I said, I will continue to fight this battle until we get a definitive answer from the developers about what they want to do, so that either I can say, we've done it, it's coming, or, all right, it's over, and, I'm done. So
this limbo, will they not, is
yes.
worse. 100%. Yeah, I mean, I wish you guys the best of luck. It kind of saddens me that both of you have had similar experiences where you express this opinion and it's instantly met with such pushback. I don't know why compromise can't be found, especially in a game like Final Fantasy XIV, where you have the liberty of creating so many different classes. And I see absolutely nothing wrong with having 1, 2, or 3 pure healer classes, where that's literally the only thing you do. In fact, if we're really talking about like having proper role distribution, most of the classes should be pure healing classes. But I think you guys are giving a fair compromise by saying, we have at least 1. You can do 2 more. I don't know what you guys are, what the actual distribution you guys want would be, but by saying, they're totally fine with keeping some healing classes that are DPS focused and having some that are healing focused. That's the case in most of the other games that I've played, where there's been, like we've used the example of Overwatch. Zenyatta is primarily a DPS.
That's right.
I saw him as a DPS, but you did healing as well, right? And then you could have like Mercy on the team, who's healing centric, healing focused.
That's
right?
Me, baby. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you get the best of both worlds. I don't see why that's such a problematic compromise, but you know what?
I don't either.
Bring on the dislikes, everybody.
That's right.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. All right, Lumi, we're going to give you a final word. Let's get some closing thoughts from you.
Closing thoughts. My biggest thing is it's the whole point of healers being, it's not necessarily the complexity of it. So when you make this talk about healers doing you should reduce the damage of healers, or healers are boring. Whenever you bring up that line, healers are boring, majority of people are going to rebut back to you with something to the effect of, oh, well, healers are boring because they don't have an intricate damage rotation. Wrong. Healers are boring because you spend 95% of your playtime doing the exact opposite of what you signed up for. This is not about rotations. This is not about damage. This is about class identity is what this is about. This is about role responsibility. So, in closing, as a healer main, I am not looking to simply spam cure on cooldown for 10 minutes straight. Again, two things can be true at once. I don't think we should eradicate all damage from all healing ever, but nor do I think that it is healthy to turn healers into DPS. I would like to spend more than, 10 of my, if I spend 5 GCDs on a heal in a Savage fight, then something went wrong. And I find that to be very poor game design. And I would like to spend more than 5% of my playtime, doing what I signed up for. And that is just the bottom line. I see no reason why I should be dealing damage, for 9 minutes, 30 seconds out of a 10-minute fight.
Sure.
So
100%. We just want to heal. We just want to heal.
Yeah,
man.
we just want to heal. It's
Yeah.
really just not that deep. We just want to heal.
Yeah, we just want to heal. 100%. A great message. Well, thank you, Illumination, for joining us. It was great having you. You definitely elevated the conversation in a way that we couldn't have had without you. We appreciate you joining us.
Definitely.
No, I'm grateful to you both. I feel like people like myself in my position, nobody's on the internet in a speak. We don't get the chance to have our voices heard enough, and
Sure.
I feel like you guys have done a really great service here today, and I'm especially grateful for having that.
Awesome.
We were glad to have you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. All right, George, the Sprouty McSprouterton over there. Sign us off, will you?
All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this conversation. If you have some legitimate counterpoints, definitely put them down in the comments.
100%.
I'm sure I speak for both Lumi and Graham here when I say we're trying to start a dialogue. It's not just,
Yes.
just aside from sharing our points, we do want to start a dialogue. So please let us know. But with that, we'll catch you guys next time.
Everybody.
Take care.